Dr. Mariana Silva stood in the operating room, the bright surgical lights illuminating her focused expression. As a talented cardiac surgeon, she had dedicated years to honing her skills, and today was no different. Her nimble fingers moved deftly as she navigated the intricate maze of arteries and veins within the chest cavity of her patient, a young father named Daniel, whose life hung in the balance. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor served as a constant reminder of the urgency of the situation. "Dr. Silva, we're losing pressure," called out Dr. Chung, her first assistant, his brow furrowed with concern. "Adjust the clamp," she instructed, her voice steady and commanding. "We need to stabilize before we proceed." Her confidence radiated, instilling a sense of calm among the team. They worked in synchrony, each member of the surgical staff understanding the gravity of their roles. With a final, precise maneuver, Mariana sutured the last artery and stepped back, allowing the anesthesiologist to administer the stabilizing medication. "Come on, Daniel," she whispered under her breath, hoping her words would somehow reach him. The heart monitor beeped steadily now, a sound of victory that resonated within her. "Patient is stable, Dr. Silva. You did it," Dr. Chung exclaimed, relief washing over his features. Mariana smiled, the weight of the world momentarily lifting off her shoulders. "Let's close him up. We still have a long way to go." Once the surgery was complete, the team exited the operating room, their scrubs stained with the remnants of a life saved. Mariana removed her surgical mask, her mind racing with thoughts of her next patient. Just as she began to unwind, her phone buzzed insistently in her pocket. She pulled it out, glancing at the screen. "Emergency call from Dr. Patel," it read. Her heart sank. Dr. Patel was the head of the cardiology department and rarely called unless the situation was dire. She answered immediately, her voice steady but filled with concern. "Dr. Patel, what's going on?" "Mariana, we have a critical case in another city. A young boy needs immediate surgery, and you're the only one qualified to handle it. Can you make it to the airport?" "Of course. I'll be there as soon as I can," she replied, her mind racing with logistics. She glanced at the clock. Time was not on her side. With her heart still racing from the earlier surgery, she rushed to gather her belongings, her mind focused on the young boy waiting for her intervention. Clutching her first-class ticket tightly, she dashed out of the hospital and into the bustling streets, determined to reach the airport without delay. The airport was a whirlwind of activity. As she entered, she was met with a long line at the check-in desk. Frustration bubbled beneath her calm exterior as she tapped her foot impatiently. The digital clock above the counter seemed to mock her, ticking down the seconds. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reached the front of the line. A young attendant with a bored expression glanced at her ticket, then back at her, his eyebrows knitting together in confusion. "First class?" he muttered, skepticism lacing his tone. "Can I see some ID?" Mariana's brow furrowed. "Of course. Here's my ID and my ticket. I'm a surgeon, and I have an emergency case to attend to." The attendant scrutinized her, his gaze lingering on her face, as if searching for something to challenge. "I just need to verify this. Please wait." As he turned away to consult with a colleague, Mariana felt a knot form in her stomach. She could feel the eyes of other travelers on her, and a sense of unease washed over her. She glanced at the clock again. Every second counted. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice firm despite the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. "I have a patient who is in critical condition. I really need to board this flight." The attendant turned back, crossing his arms. "I understand, but we have procedures to follow. Just a moment." Her heart raced as she watched him speak with another staff member, the conversation dragging on while her mind raced with worry for the young boy she had yet to meet. The urgency of the situation loomed over her like a storm cloud, and she could feel her patience wearing thin. "Please," she urged, her voice steadier than she felt. "This is a matter of life and death." The attendant raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. "I'm sure it is, but we need to follow protocol." Mariana took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. She was no stranger to challenges, but this felt different. The weight of discrimination pressed down on her, a familiar but unwelcome burden. She stood tall, determined not to let the biases of others define her. Dr. Mariana Silva stood at the check-in counter, her heart racing as the airline staff member continued to scrutinize her ticket, her demeanor cold and dismissive. The bustling airport around her felt like a distant world, each second stretching painfully as the clock ticked. She maintained her composure, though the internal struggle against the creeping anxiety was palpable. The staff member, a young woman with piercing blue eyes that seemed to judge her more than assess her, had already demanded identification twice. "Ma'am, I assure you, this is a first-class ticket. I need to board this flight immediately," Mariana said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside her. "There's a patient in critical condition waiting for my expertise." The woman paused, her gaze flickering to the queue of passengers behind Mariana, who were now beginning to murmur amongst themselves. "I understand, but I still need to verify your credentials. Can you provide your medical license?" Mariana felt a rush of frustration. She reached into her bag, pulling out her medical credentials with trembling hands. "Here, I am a cardiac surgeon. My flight is critical to saving a life. Please, I need your help." The staff member looked down at the documents, then back at Mariana, her skepticism unyielding. "I'm sorry, but I will need to speak with my supervisor. Please wait here." As the young woman turned away, Mariana's heart sank. She could see the clock ticking with each deliberate second. Thoughts raced through her mind. What if she didn't make it in time? What if the patient's condition deteriorated? She had dedicated her life to saving others, yet here she was, battling not just for a flight, but against an insidious prejudice that pervaded the system. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was an older man in a suit who had been watching the scene unfold. "Is there a problem?" Mariana turned, desperation evident in her eyes. "I'm a doctor. I need to get on that flight. The staff doesn't seem to believe me." The man raised an eyebrow, glancing at the airline employee who was now speaking to a supervisor across the terminal. "That's absurd. You have your credentials, right?" "Yes, but they're treating me like I'm a fraud," Mariana replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm used to being respected for my work, not questioned at an airport." The man nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I understand. The system can be frustrating. Let me see if I can help." Minutes later, the airline supervisor, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, approached. He looked down at Mariana as if she was an inconvenience. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "Sir, I am Dr. Mariana Silva. I need to board my flight immediately. There's a patient whose life depends on my arrival," she explained, forcing calm into her voice. The supervisor scrutinized her with narrowed eyes, as if trying to uncover a hidden flaw. "You don't look like a doctor," he stated bluntly. Mariana's heart sank further. "I assure you, I am. The credentials speak for themselves. I've saved lives, and I need to continue doing so." "Let me see your ID again," he replied, crossing his arms. "I've already provided it," she snapped, a mix of anger and helplessness rising within her. "This isn't right. I'm being discriminated against for no reason other than my appearance." His expression hardened. "I'm not calling you a fraud, Dr. Silva. I just need to verify everything. We have procedures." "Procedures that put lives at risk?" she exclaimed, frustration boiling over. "I need to speak to someone who can actually help me." "Please, just a moment," he said, waving his hand dismissively as he turned to the airline staff member. "Call security if she doesn't comply." The word struck her like a punch to the gut. As she stood there, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment, she felt small and insignificant against the backdrop of a system designed to protect the status quo. The seconds slipped by, and with each tick of the clock, her worry for her patient deepened. "Please," she pleaded, her voice softening, "just let me speak to a supervisor who can understand. I can't afford to lose any more time." The supervisor's eyes narrowed, but he remained silent, dismissing her with a wave of his hand, leaving her to grapple with the profound injustice of the moment. Mariana felt a surge of anxiety as the supervisor approached. His presence loomed over her like a dark cloud, his gaze sharp and assessing, as if he were scrutinizing her very essence. He was a middle-aged white man, dressed in a crisp, tailored suit, his thinning hair combed back with an air of authority. As he stepped up to the check-in counter, he didn't even bother to greet her, his eyes flickering to her ticket before landing back on her face, full of skepticism. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his voice devoid of warmth. Mariana took a deep breath, attempting to maintain her composure. "I have a first-class ticket for the emergency flight to Cedar Point. I'm a cardiac surgeon, and I need to reach a patient who is in critical condition. I can provide my credentials," she explained, her voice steady despite the tumultuous emotions brewing inside her. The supervisor raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "A cardiac surgeon? You expect me to believe that? This is a first-class flight, ma'am. You don't look like the type who would be traveling in such luxury." Mariana's heart sank at his words, the sting of discrimination cutting deep. She glanced around, hoping for a glimmer of support, but the surrounding passengers were lost in their own worlds, indifferent to her plight. "I assure you, I'm qualified. I have my medical license and identification here." She pulled out her wallet and produced her credentials, but the supervisor merely waved them away dismissively. "I'll need to verify those," he said curtly, already signaling to a nearby staff member to make the call. The minutes dragged on, and Mariana could feel the weight of time pressing down upon her. Each passing second felt like a countdown, a reminder of the patient's life hanging in the balance. Just as despair began to creep in, a voice broke through the tension. "Excuse me." A woman, dressed in scrubs and sporting a stethoscope around her neck, stepped forward. "I couldn't help but overhear. I'm a nurse at Cedar Point Hospital. Dr. Silva is one of our top cardiac surgeons. She's the best of the best." The supervisor turned to the nurse, his expression softening slightly but still skeptical. "And how do you know her?" "I've worked with her numerous times. She's saved countless lives," the nurse continued earnestly. "Please, you have to let her through. The patient needs her." Mariana's heart raced at this unexpected support. The nurse's words were like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. The supervisor hesitated, glancing between Mariana and the nurse, and then finally, reluctantly nodded. "Fine, but you need to hurry. The flight is about to close." "Thank you," Mariana exclaimed, a rush of relief flooding through her. Without another moment to lose, she grabbed her belongings and sprinted toward the gate, her heart pounding wildly against her ribcage. Each step was a battle between hope and fear, the weight of what lay ahead pressing heavily on her mind. As she dashed through the terminal, the bustling crowd seemed to part for her, a blur of faces that no longer registered in her periphery. All that mattered was reaching the plane in time. She could already picture the patient, the family waiting anxiously, their lives intertwining with her own in that critical moment. Finally, she reached the gate, breathless and flushed. The flight attendant, a young woman with warm eyes, smiled sympathetically as she scanned Mariana's ticket. "You made it just in time. We were about to close the doors." Mariana nodded, her gratitude spilling over. "Thank you. Thank you so much," she gasped, stepping onto the jet bridge. With each hurried stride, she felt the adrenaline coursing through her veins, a fierce determination igniting within her. As she settled into her seat, the realization of what had just transpired began to wash over her. The discrimination, the doubt cast upon her abilities, the feeling of being an outsider. It all swirled in her mind like a storm. But now, she was on her way to save a life. She would not let the prejudice of others define her or her capabilities. She was Dr. Mariana Silva, a proud Black woman, a skilled surgeon, and she would confront every obstacle thrown her way with resilience and strength. As the plane ascended into the sky, Dr. Mariana Silva settled into her first-class seat, her heart still racing from the ordeal she had just experienced. The roar of the engines faded into a low hum, but the adrenaline coursed through her veins. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to breathe deeply. The relief of being on board was palpable, yet her mind was far from calm. Mariana's thoughts spiraled back to the moments spent at the airport, the dismissive glances, the raised eyebrows, and the condescending tone of the supervisor. She reflected on the hurdles she had faced as a Black woman in a predominantly white field, The constant need to prove herself, the weight of expectations heavier than her surgical scrubs. "Why do I have to keep fighting to be seen?" she whispered to herself, the words barely audible over the sound of the engines. Suddenly, her phone buzzed violently against the armrest, jolting her from her reverie. It was a call from the hospital. With trembling fingers, she answered, her heart now pounding for an entirely different reason. "Dr. Silva?" a voice crackled on the line. "We have an update on the patient. His condition has worsened. We need you here as soon as possible." Panic surged through her. "What do you mean worsened? What are his vitals?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The nurse on the other end relayed the information, but Mariana's mind was racing too fast to absorb it all. The urgency of the situation pressed down on her like a weight, amplifying her anxiety. She could feel the walls of the aircraft closing in, the familiar confines of her medical expertise feeling far away. "Is there any way you can send me the latest scans?" she asked, her mind already calculating the steps she would need to take once they landed. "I need to prepare for what I'm walking into." "Of course, Dr. Silva. I'll send them right away," the nurse replied, her voice a reassuring presence amidst the chaos. Mariana ended the call, her hands shaking as she set her phone down. She glanced around the cabin, feeling the eyes of her fellow passengers on her, though she couldn't tell if they were filled with concern or judgment. As she sat there, lost in thought, a flight attendant approached her with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Can I get you anything to drink?" Mariana looked up, forcing a smile despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "Actually, I need your help," she said, her voice laced with urgency. "I'm a cardiac surgeon, and I just received troubling news about a patient. I need to get off this plane as soon as we land." The attendant's expression shifted to one of concern. "Of course, I understand. I'll make sure the captain is aware of your situation. We'll do everything we can to assist you once we land." "Thank you," Mariana replied, her heart swelling with gratitude at the attendant's empathy. It was a stark contrast to the treatment she had just endured. "I just want to make sure I can save him." "Let me see what I can do," the attendant said, her determination evident. As she walked away, Mariana felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps not everyone viewed her through the lens of prejudice. Maybe, just maybe, there were allies even in the most unexpected places. The plane continued its ascent, and Mariana leaned back in her seat, attempting to calm her racing thoughts. She closed her eyes again, envisioning the operating room, the familiar hum of machines, the focused energy of her team. "I can do this," she whispered to herself, a mantra meant to drown out the doubts. But deep down, the truth lingered. This fight was not just about her patient. It was a battle against the systemic biases that had long plagued her career. She thought of the countless times she had been undermined, the condescending remarks, the way her expertise was questioned solely because of the color of her skin. "I won't let them win," she murmured, feeling a surge of determination. As the flight progressed, she received the scans from the nurse, and she studied them intently, her mind shifting into high gear. With each passing minute, the reality of her patient's situation weighed heavily on her. She was a fighter, and she had proven herself time and again. This time would be no different. The plane began its descent, and Mariana's heart raced once more. Not just from anxiety, but from the fierce resolve to reclaim her narrative, to ensure that her journey, both as a surgeon and as a Black woman, would not be defined by prejudice. She would arrive prepared, ready to confront whatever awaited her, not just for the sake of her patient, but for herself and for all those who faced the same battles in silence. Dr. Mariana Silva's heart raced as the plane touched down, the wheels screeching against the tarmac. The adrenaline that had propelled her through the chaotic airport still surged through her veins, igniting a flicker of hope amid the shadows of doubt that clung to her. She could not shake the feeling of being judged, of being an outsider in a world that often failed to see her for the capable surgeon she was. Each hurried step through the terminal echoed with unspoken scrutiny, a reminder of the prejudice she had faced just hours earlier. As soon as she exited the jet bridge, Mariana focused on her goal, the hospital. The vibrant faces of fellow travelers blurred around her, but she felt isolated, as if a barrier separated her from the rest of humanity. Would they understand? Would they ever see past the color of her skin to the dedication she poured into her work? These questions swirled in her mind as she navigated through the bustling crowd, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. "Excuse me, Dr. Silva?" A voice broke through her reverie. It was Tanya, one of the nurses from her team, rushing toward her with a clipboard in hand. "You made it. We've been waiting for you. The patient is in critical condition." Mariana forced a smile, grateful for the support of her team. "Thank you, Tanya. I need all the details right now. What's his status?" She began walking briskly, her mind shifting gears as she prepared for the surgery ahead. "He's stable, but only just. The cardiologist is concerned about the risk of cardiac arrest. We need to act fast," Tanya replied, matching Mariana's pace. The team is already in the OR, setting everything up. As they approached the surgical suite, Mariana felt the familiar surge of purpose take over. The challenges she had just faced at the airport seemed to dissipate, replaced by the singular focus on saving a life. Yet, deep down, the sting of the day's discrimination lingered, a dark cloud hovering over her resolve. Once inside the operating room, Mariana quickly donned her surgical gown, the fabric a comforting barrier between her and the world outside. Her team greeted her with nods of solidarity, their expressions a mixture of concern and determination. They had no idea about the battle she had just fought, but their trust in her abilities was palpable. "All right, team," she said, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. "Let's get to work. Time is of the essence." With practiced precision, she began outlining the surgical plan, her voice steady and authoritative. The team rallied around her, responding to her leadership with unwavering focus. Just as they were about to begin, the doors swung open, and Mariana's heart sank at the sight of the airline supervisor who had questioned her at the airport. His expression was a mix of guilt and defiance, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The sterile environment of the OR clashed with the tension that crackled in the air. "Dr. Silva," he began, his voice echoing against the cold walls. "I need to speak with you." Mariana felt the blood rush to her face, anger bubbling beneath her composed exterior. "This is not the time or place," she replied, her tone clipped. "I have a patient whose life is at risk." "I understand that," he insisted, stepping closer, his presence intrusive, "but I want to apologize for the way I treated you earlier. I didn't know you were—" "Stop right there," she interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "Your ignorance could have cost a life today. It's not just about you apologizing. It's about understanding the systemic issues that allow this kind of discrimination to occur." The supervisor's face fell, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. "I didn't mean to—" "Your actions matter," Mariana said firmly, her eyes narrowing. "You need to understand that people's lives depend on the decisions you make and the biases you hold. I'm not here to entertain your regrets. I'm here to save a life." With that, she turned her back to him, refocusing on her team, the moment of confrontation fueling her determination. As she positioned herself at the surgical table, she could feel the eyes of her colleagues on her, a silent acknowledgement of the hurdles she faced, both in and out of the operating room. "Let's begin," Mariana commanded, her voice steady. In that moment, she knew that no matter the challenges she encountered, she would always rise to meet them, not just for herself, but for every patient who relied on her expertise and compassion. The operating room was filled with a tense silence, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the monitors and the low hum of the surgical instruments. Dr. Mariana Silva stood at the helm, her hands steady and her focus unwavering. As she navigated through the intricate network of arteries and veins, she felt a surge of adrenaline, a feeling she had come to know well in her years as a cardiac surgeon. The stakes were high, and the patient's life hung by a thread. "Scalpel," she commanded, her voice firm yet calm. The surgical nurse, sensing the gravity of the moment, quickly handed her the instrument. Mariana's brow furrowed with concentration as she expertly made the necessary incisions. Her team, a mix of seasoned professionals and eager interns, watched her with a mix of admiration and anxiety. "Dr. Silva, we've got some bleeding here," a young resident spoke up, his voice laced with worry. Mariana glanced at the monitor, noting the patient's declining vitals. "Clamp the vessel. We need to control the bleeding now," she instructed, her heart pounding in her chest. The team sprang into action, each member well aware that the next few moments could mean the difference between life and death. Mariana felt a familiar resolve wash over her, a determination forged in the fires of adversity. As she worked, thoughts of her earlier ordeal at the airport flickered in her mind. The discrimination she faced had been a cruel reminder of the biases that still permeated society. But now, in this sterile environment, she channeled that anger into focus. There was no room for doubt or fear. Only the patient's life mattered. "Clear," she called, and her team complied, stepping back as she delivered a controlled electric shock to stabilize the heart rhythm. The patient's body jerked, and for a brief moment, hope surged as the monitor beeped in a steadier rhythm. Just when she thought things might be under control, the surgical assistant leaned in close. "Dr. Silva, there's an update from the family. They've been informed about your struggle at the airport. They are really grateful for your care." Mariana paused, momentarily taken aback. The weight of the family's support fell over her like a warm blanket, reinforcing her resolve. "Tell them thank you," she replied, her voice steady. "Their trust means everything right now." With renewed vigor, she returned her focus to the patient. The encouraging words from the family echoed in her mind, a reminder that her fight against prejudice wasn't just for herself, but for those who looked to her for hope and healing. Hours passed in a blur of concentration and skill. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mariana completed the procedure. As she stepped back, drenched in sweat and satisfaction, the anesthesiologist announced, "We've stabilized him. He's going to pull through." A mix of relief and triumph washed over her. Mariana exchanged glances with her team, who were visibly relieved and proud. They had faced the storm together and emerged victorious. As she prepared to leave the operating room, she was approached by the hospital administration. The head administrator, a stern-looking woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, wasted no time. "Dr. Silva, we need to discuss what happened earlier with the airline supervisor." Mariana straightened, her heart racing again. But this time it was from a different kind of adrenaline. "I'm ready to speak about it," she said firmly. The administrator nodded, her expression serious. "We've heard from several staff members about his behavior towards you. This isn't just an isolated incident. We will not tolerate discrimination in our hospital, especially when it affects patient care." Mariana felt a swell of hope. He needs to understand the impact of his actions. "It goes beyond me. It affects the patients we serve." As they spoke, the doors swung open, and in walked the supervisor, looking disheveled and defensive. The tension in the room escalated as the administrator confronted him directly. "Your actions at the airport were unacceptable, and we've received reports detailing your conduct. This behavior is not representative of our values here." Mariana stood tall, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. "You denied me access based on your prejudice. I didn't just fight for myself. I fought for every individual facing the same biases. Your actions put lives at risk." The supervisor sputtered, trying to defend himself, but the weight of his actions bore down upon him. With a final statement from the administrator, the supervisor was escorted out of the hospital, his dismissal a victory for those who had suffered under his prejudice. Mariana felt a rush of empowerment. She had not only saved a life that day, but had also confronted the systemic discrimination that threatened to undermine her profession. As she stepped out of the operating room, she knew that her journey was far from over, but she was ready to lead the way for change. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and watch this next story. It's incredibly exciting.